This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the place to go for all of your website needs. Hop over to www.squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial, and if you like what you see and want to move forward, receive 10% off your first order by using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. Not all who wander are lost. J.R.R. Tolkien. But some of them are. That would be me. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and this is, and isn't, the review I thought I'd make. Which is to say, I thought that the title would be something like Fujifilm X-S20, half price, 2/3 the size, weight, and functionality, Mini-Me X-H2S, which, in fact, I think it is. 1. The X-S20 is shockingly small, light, and performant. It had been about 2 years since I'd had the X-S10 in hand, and it was only when I picked up the X-S20 again a few weeks ago that I realized I'd forgotten how diminutive it is. Now, there is a little bit of a paradox here. Compared to our Leica SL2, Nikon Z7 II, and Sony A7R5, the X-S20 feels almost toy-like, although objectively speaking, it's not that much smaller than the Nikon and Sony. And there is nothing toy-like about its build, capabilities, or balance in hand, making it absolutely wonderful for travel and street photography and or location videography. Much like the new 8mm f3.5 announced at the same time, which is again shockingly small, especially compared to the brilliant Sigma 14 1.4 DGDN art I reviewed recently. At $800 and just 215 grams, the XF8 3.5 is half the price and basically 1/5 the weight of the Sigma. Sure, the Sigma has a 4-stop advantage, making it a superior choice for astrophotography in particular, but let's get real. For 99% of us, 99% of the time, a lens this wide not used for astrophotography will be stopped down, and even wide open, the 8mm 3.5 surprised me with its optical quality in the real world.
Why do I make things complicated? Why do I lose all my control? I keep on letting my bad habits make us both come crashing to the floor.
The size of the X-S20 and the 8mm 3.5 is a critical point because both run counter to the trend of APS-C and micro four thirds cameras and lenses, for that matter, growing larger. Bucking that trend is a good thing, a necessary thing, I think. Hold that thought. 2, the X-S20 is essentially a well-considered refinement of the X-S10. No bombshells here, but even at a 30% premium over the X-S10, the upgrades one gets for that extra $300 at $1,300 total, still just 54% of the 26-megapixel X-H2S, are sufficient to make the X-S20 a better X-H2S than the X-H2S itself for many of us, and a fascinating competitor to a camera we hold in very high regard and use as our daily driver here in the Batcave, Panasonic's full-frame Lumix S5 II. Hold that thought. By using as many of the bits and bobs as possible from the X-S10, which is to say fundamentally upgrading only A, the processor to the latest 5th generation unit found in the X-T5 and X-H2 series, and B, the battery to the one first found in the X-T4, Fujifilm has managed to improve a bunch of things, from autofocus to IBIS, video, including 6.2K open gate, 4K 60p with just a 1.18 crop, raw recording out, single card slot speed, still only one slot, but now UHS-2, port configuration, there's finally a dedicated 3.5mm headphone jack in addition to the mic jack, yay. Thermal management, the same optional auxiliary fan for the X-H2 series is also available for the X-S20, and remote app, as in completely redone right down to a name change. Bottom line from our particular vantage point as YouTubers, the X-S20 with my 16-55 2.8 red badge zoom is all we'd need for precisely this kind of video, and of course, you knew this was coming. I'm using it right here and now. And for many of us, the X-S20 is a great photographer's tool. I've still got a 27 by 40 inch print taken on the second generation X-T2 which is one of my favorite images of all time. And as a stills capture tool, the XS20 is functionally superior, not in most ways, but every way to the X-T2. In fact, Fujifilm's sensors and processors dating back to the X-T2 have all been capable of wonderful imagery, like this. The XS20 is a perfect example, really, I think, of a company doing most everything right. In 2023, Fujifilm has essentially given us a successor to the company's flagship hybrid of just 5 years ago, the X-H1, functionally superior to the X-H1 in every way save for weather sealing and what Frederick Hertzberg might have identified as a few hygienic factors, like the X-H1's top plate LCD, larger, higher resolution EVF, and that exquisite shutter release. While being smaller, lighter, and 1/3 less expensive in nominal terms than the X-H1, closing in on fully half the price adjusted for inflation. This is an exceptional accomplishment, not a cripple hammer in sight, not a closed lens mount to be found. Fujifilm's clear-eyed financial and operational acumen, examples of the industry at its best. Of course, there remains room for improvement. I'm talking about, among other things, the quite small, relatively low-resolution viewfinder, the absence of shutter angle for video, the lack of a second USB port for long-form uninterrupted streaming, the lack of a dedicated stills video switch, a personal bugaboo of mine, the lack of a full-sized HDMI port, still fiddly secondary controls, continuing upgrades required to core lenses like the 16-55 2.8 red badge zoom or the 27 2.8, although Sigma makes some nice alternatives in the meantime, and a menu system I recently called, I said it, dastardly. That's because, even though almost all menu systems are dastardly, A, locating a card formatting option under user settings as just one example, rather than media or storage is, I don't know what. B, labeling something as simple as JPEG simulation bypass, instead natural live view, with the result that it does the opposite of what most of us would expect, that is, exposure, white balance, and depth of field preview, but instead disables those things, except, as it turns out, only partially that for the Acros simulations because why? C, forget about it. I just don't feel like spending more time on those things because none of them prevent us from capturing great imagery. There is a much larger point to be made. Hold that thought too. And for those of us already familiar with the interface, or those of us thrilled, rightly so, to tap into so much functionality for all of $1,300, my bane of the YouTuber's existence, nits, are quite beside the point. 3. In fact, even with an ever tougher competitive landscape, the XS20 holds its own, so let's take a closer look at the competition. The APS-C Sony a6600 I mentioned in my review of the XS10 2 years ago is now the $1,400 a6700. The Micro Four Thirds GH5 and G9 I mentioned in the same video are now the $1,700 GH6 and a who knows what, when, how much, possibly hybrid phase detect autofocusing G9 Mark II. The full-frame Lumix S5 I mentioned back then is now the dramatically better $2,000 S5 II. And the Canon competitors that didn't even exist back in the day are now the APS-C R100, R50, R10, $1,400 EOS R7, the full-frame $1,500 R8, and okay, fine, the full-frame $2,500 R6 II while we're at it. But while I am not going to give you a blow-by-blow comparison for each of these cameras because I've simply got too much on my plate, too little time to do it. You won't watch all the way through, and there are other channels out there, I'm sure, which have. I will say this, although, as always, your mileage may vary, and that's fine. First, Canon, I think, remains too wedded to a closed lens ecosystem characterized by too many high-priced Holy Trinity full-frame zooms, too many high-priced f1.2 full-frame primes, too many bargain-priced mediocre full-frame primes, too many bargain-priced mediocre APS-C everything, no high-performance reasonably priced APS-C anything, to be a compelling APS-C or full-frame alternative for many of us to the XS20, even with Canon's good but not as good as some of us assert ergonomics, and, on the other hand, to be fair, one of the best autofocus systems out there, full stop. Second, then again, Sony's full-frame lens ecosystem is wide, deep, performant at various price points, low to high, and open. And it has released a few interesting APS-C lenses like their 11 f1.8, 15 f1.4, and 16 to 55 f2.8, all G lenses. And then there are APS-C lenses from independent lens manufacturers, as I mentioned before, Sigma, and notably, especially Tamron. But Sony simply does not have the focus, the dedicated focus on the APS-C segment that Fujifilm does. And the A6700, in spite of, by all accounts, compelling autofocus, I haven't had it in hand, I couldn't tell you, continues to suffer from industrial design weaknesses absent in the XS20. Which doesn't mean that Sony won't be compelling to many of us. It no doubt will, especially for those of us who want a single mount to make migrating from APS-C to full frame easily, especially if the rumors of a 33 megapixel full frame A7C and 61 megapixel A7R are true and the cameras are well executed, especially if mated to one of Sony's compact and performant 24 2.8, 42.5, or 52.5 G lenses, or Sigma's brilliant DGDN I series for travel or street. Although, fair enough, if true, these new Sonys are likely to be somewhere between more expensive and significantly more expensive than the XS20. Third, as I implied moments ago, Panasonic's full-frame S5 II is a compelling hybrid camera with massively improved autofocus and brilliant active cooling that gives us all we need here at Three Blind Men and an Elephant, for video especially, but this is 50% more expensive than the XS20. Even if, apart from the differences in sensor formats, the two cameras are much closer spec for spec than one might imagine, as in both of them doing 6.2K open gate. For those of us who imagine full frame as the ultimate goal, the S5 II and the L-mount Alliance lens ecosystem, a far larger and more robust ecosystem than even 2 years ago, may be a second system to sway those of us who are swayable from Fujifilm's APS-C lineup. Especially because I think the L-mount Alliance has better ergos than Fujifilm, actually, and Nikon, and Sony, and actually, Canon. Then again, Panasonic's Micro Four Thirds offerings have taken a backseat to their full-frame effort, and that lack of effort shows up most especially in autofocus performance. So I think it's fair to say that although Micro Four Thirds and APS-C were once peers, today the XS20 has little to fear from the Micro Four Thirds segment. Unless, again, the rumors of a hybrid phase detect G9 II prove to be accurate, and it is delivered in a relevant time frame, which has happened before. Just ask the XH1. What about Nikon? Well, Nikon, I'm delighted to say, has come roaring back in the full-frame mirrorless space with a slew of new cameras released since the XS10, and that would include the Z6 II, Z7 II, Z9, Z8, and it has rounded out the wide and deep Nikkor, I pronounced that right, Z-line, especially their S-line, which I think is superb. But after introducing their first APS-C camera, the sub-900 Z50 in 2019, going retro with the also sub-$900 ZFC in 2021, which one could argue is the most direct competitor to the Fujifilm X-T line in look and feel, if not in specs, and most recently releasing the non-EVF, non-IBIS sub-$800 Z30, Nikon still offers just 5 dedicated APS-C coverage lenses for the Z-mount, third-party manufacturers actually having more lenses out there than Nikon itself. So, Much as I hold Nikon in high regard, I'd say the XS20 has little to fear from Nikon. All of which leaves us where precisely? With the growing size of Fujifilm's XH series, the XS20 is a strong counterargument for returning to core APS-C advantages of size, weight, and cost without having to compromise on image quality or much of anything else except viewfinder and resolution. It really is a perfect example, I think, of when a company does most everything right. In 2023, Fujifilm has essentially given us a successor to the company's flagship hybrid of just 5 years ago, the XH1, functionally superior to the XH1 in almost every way, save for the XH1's weather sealing and larger high-resolution EVF. Okay, top plate. We talked about this before. Yet the XS20 is smaller, lighter, and call it a third less expensive. This is an exceptional accomplishment, not a cripple hammer in sight, not a closed lens mount to be found. Fujifilm's clear-eyed financial and operational acumen, examples of the industry at its best. But there are other things to consider. 1. Although Fujifilm has released their wonderful 18 and 33 1.4s, they feel to me more than anything else like full-frame lenses, and this fact blunts APS-C's size and weight advantages. Personally, I think it makes sense for Fujifilm to concentrate on making much smaller, still optically superb lenses. Say, a complete refresh and rethink of the f2 Fujicrons, and the 8mm f3.5 is an excellent place to start. It does cost more than the current Fujicrons, but it's worth it in my book. It's a very tasty lens, bordering on the incredible given its size and weight compared to Sigma's 14 1.4 DGDN art I tested a few months ago, which is probably why they chose to launch it at the same time as the small XS20. 2. High-resolution sensors, I think, are especially valuable for keeping APS-C systems small. Yeah, pixel density, diffraction beginning at a larger aperture than one might suspect, high ISO performance, not what it should be, blah, blah, blah. All non sequiturs from where I sit because I rarely shoot above ISO 12,800. Most of us don't either and shouldn't. Rarely smaller than f5.6. Most of us don't either and shouldn't. Focus stacking exists for a reason. And my own experience is that a higher megapixel sensor at identical object size outperforms low pixel count, large pixel surface sensors at high ISO anyway. Extra resolution in the XS20 would give it reach, obviating the need for, say, carrying the 56 1.2, because cropping a 33 1.4 would give away little to nothing in terms of shallowest depth of field or resolution at anything resembling normal print sizes and viewing distances. 3. In an era of 15-second reels, I think smartphones actually make better vlogging cameras for many vloggers out there than dedicated cameras. Smartphones are easier to use, smaller, lighter, less obtrusive, and cheaper, as in they've already been paid for because they're phones for sake. I think most vloggers would be better off spending their time and money on better lighting, audio, and editing. But the most successful vloggers, I suspect, are either exceptionally clever in concept and or visually arresting on their own, quite without the help of dedicated camera technology. Just saying. I want to close out this video by addressing the second half of the title question, for me, the most interesting of all. How could the XS20 possibly represent what's wrong with the industry? Glad you asked. Back in 1969, I bought my first real camera, the 35mm Canon FT-QL SLR. Something like this. If I recall correctly, it cost about $200 with the manual focus only, manual exposure only, Canon FL 50mm f1.8. You could adjust the shutter speed, the aperture and focus for each shot. You'd set the film speed once at the beginning of a roll of film, and then after each shot, advance to the next frame like this. But that's all you could do. Except rewind the film and bring it to the local camera store for processing, or, if you were really committed like I was, develop and then print the images yourself. The thing of it is, the cameras back then were so mechanical, such beautiful objects, so inspiring, that just like I imagined so many of us back then, I was thrilled even when dry firing the camera. Adjusted for inflation, that camera would cost about $1,700 today, almost identical to the XS20 with Fujifilm's very competent 18 to 55 2.8 to 4 kit lens. Of course, the image quality, autofocus, and operational speed of the XS20 absolutely crushes what my FTQL could do. So bravo imaging industry, because the same thing can be said of almost any modern camera. The problem is that we now live so far inside the futz zone that we're scaring people away. What I fear the entire industry has missed is the giant so what of it all, because I'd bet that 99% of us, 99% of the time, use less than 5% of literally hundreds of menu options on most of today's digital cameras. I fear the entire industry has utterly missed the real reason for the resurgence of interest in film cameras by those of us weaned on smartphones. I fear the entire industry has also missed that it is the very same reason those of us weaned on film cameras find digital and smartphones so compelling. And that is, beyond functionality, the best smartphones, the best film cameras, and the very best digital cameras are all paragons of, let's call it, the thinginess of things. And simply get out of the way. Just like the FTQL was for me more than half a century ago. Cameras like this are delightful to look at, delightful to hold, delightful to the touch, delightfully simple, delightfully capable. You could say the same thing about smartphones. They are all premium products, not because of how much they can do, but because of how they do it and how they make us feel when we do it through them. Which is to say, the best cameras are the ones that inspire our curiosity and wonder, but most importantly, in the end, allow the photographer the shortest distance between intent and execution. Which is the number one reason I think mirrorless cameras have taken over the industry. They are WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get through the electronic viewfinder, and really, for all of the modularity of the next camera I bought back in 1971 or 72, this guy, a Canon F1. How much more could it do for me than the FT? How much of every image I took was because of the camera? How much of every image I took was because of me? Is it any different for anyone else? But man, oh man, is the F1 silky smooth. In short, I fear this industry myopia, this insistence by so much of the imaging industry that what we need most is to make things faster, more granular, more customizable, more complicated. That changing the colors of a menu system, adding another menu system on top of it, going from horizontal to vertical navigation, adding more function buttons, adding more customization options, will be the ruin of the industry. Fujifilm's competence in financial management and operational excellence, plainly evident in the XS20, really it's easy for me to recommend it, is, however and perversely, also a warning sign, I think, that Fujifilm is in danger of losing its mojo. That is, losing sight of what makes it special for Fujifilm fans, losing sight of what is truly important to camera buyers, and suddenly facing a sharp decline in demand. They are not, by a long shot, the only ones for whom I fear this fate. I fear this fate for most of the industry. Put differently, as functionally superb as the XS20 is, despite it being such a value, it is worth asking this. Are we sanguine that today it practically takes an engineer or programmer to use the camera to its full potential? About how many people we are turning away from dedicated cameras because, like the XS20, they are a triumph of specifications, customization, and theoretical image quality over the actual joy of shooting, the discovery it brings, the sense of mastery it can offer, and what import the actual image quality when shared on a smartphone screen, on Instagram, even an 8x10 print. How many of us print at all? I mean, 6.2K open gate for amateurs or enthusiasts because, hey, 9x16 vertical. Think about that for a minute. How can that possibly matter when the display size on an iPhone 14 is all of 14 square inches, and the most popular subject matter on TikTok is something like this? How much image quality are we really giving up without OpenGate? Who really cares? Customization because, hey, have it your way? Seriously? We're not talking about burgers with or without hot sauce. Can you imagine car manufacturers giving us the option of steering with the, steering wheel, or remapping steering to the big radio volume knob? Kind of like using an aperture ring to set shutter speed. And then there's log and raw through HDMI out. Because, hey, you're a one-man band on deadline every week, YouTube is compressing the crap out of your video, and a micro HDMI port is a good idea? Think about that for a minute. How many times have you ever watched a swipe on YouTube comparing log footage to 8-bit 420 standard Rec 709 straight out of camera, which is the actual comparison that should be made, instead of 100% of the time in my experience, watching log footage ungraded compared to log footage graded, which is quite beside the point. Again, how much of a difference do you think there really is? How important do you think that difference really is? You consider yourself a storyteller? How much better is your storytelling because log, raw? What about spending more time working out a beginning, a middle, and an end? I understand. Companies need to have higher margins to offset dramatically lower unit volumes and have to find a balance that works for them. Fair enough. An X100 say, probably wouldn't have the same margin as an XH2 or XH2S, and there's no chance of buying a second or third lens for it. Especially if Fujifilm were to put that 40 megapixel sensor in it, along with a much bigger combination OVF with bigger, higher resolution OLED EVF. Although, that would be something. But is the strategy for short-term survival good for the longer term? How many camera companies will reach the longer term on the current orthodox trajectory? Is it time, in other words, for Fujifilm and just about every other camera company to stop layering complexity on top of complexity, hardware and software, become a bit more risk assumptive, and start building fundamentally reconceptualized cameras not for engineers, but for poets? Artists? Is it time to recognize the differences across too many dedicated camera brands, sensor formats, and ergonomics are narrowing at an accelerating rate, something I'll call a convergence toward the average? That full-frame mirrorless cameras have, with a couple of notable exceptions, become smaller. Medium format cameras have become smaller. While Micro Four Thirds and APS-C cameras have, again with a couple of notable exceptions like the X-S20, gotten larger. That differences in dynamic range and high ISO performance, when equalized for depth of field, have narrowed. That it's not just size and weight, but also form factor, manual of arms, and wildly, ludicrously complicated menu systems that have converged upon an utterly uninspiring sameness. Is it time to dump the complexity, dump the ridiculous menu systems, dump the gajillion function buttons, go radically simple, radically beautiful, radically thoroughly considered and debugged rather than making us beta testers, radically human-centered, radically premium in the way that premium actually matters? Yes, Leica and Hasselblad figured this out years ago, but they have their own challenges, sure, beginning with price, fair enough. But do imagine the IBIS and autofocus of the X-S20 combined with the sensor and EVF of the XH2 and a slightly bigger, if it had to be, X100 or XE with a new gorgeous industrial design and smartphone simple touch interface, and finally, A very few, but suitably large and haptically appealing buttons positioned where one's fingers would naturally fall without shifting position and could be used with gloves? One more thought for today. I wonder if the industry is on the cusp of a paradigm shift so profound, not that it hasn't been through 1 or 3 profound shifts already, that it will continue to ignore until it's too late, analogous to legacy auto manufacturers continuing to build and sell internal combustion engine vehicles right up to the point that they simply, suddenly stop selling. Inventories piling up so far beyond retailers' lots that they essentially become landfill because electric cars were a joke until they weren't. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From custom domains to beautiful websites using their easily customizable templates that you can have up and running in minutes, e-commerce, email and email marketing, SEO, analytics, and scheduling, Squarespace does it all and has done it for us for the last 6 years. If you are a small to mid-sized business in any industry, Squarespace is the place to go for all of your website needs. Hop over to www.squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial. And if you like what you see and want to move forward, receive 10% off your first order by using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. Like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, join the conversation in the comment section below because this is an exceptional audience. If you'd like help with a portfolio review, gear selection, finding or honing your artistic voice, sign up for a one-on-one mentoring video call via Zoom at 3bmep.com/booking. Finally, please consider supporting our work by using the no-cost to you affiliate links down below, sending us coffee money via PayPal, or most especially, joining us on Patreon, links down below as well. However you choose to support us, as always, we thank you for it.